up, everybody? Another episode of Ripple Effect Podcast. I'm your host, Ricky Varandas. Today we have returning guest Daniele Bolelli, podcaster, martial artist, author, and now history podcast too, History on Fire. Please check out that podcast if you're a Dan Carlin fan, like I'm sure you are. And his podcast will hit on different historical events and different stories. It's great alternative to Dan Carlin. Obviously, like we talked about in this podcast with Daniele, you're kind of limited with how many podcasts you can put out because of all the research that it takes to get the information for each podcast. So if between Dan Carlin, if you want another alternative, History on Fire is a great podcast. And if you don't listen to Dan Carlin, then still listen to History on Fire and also check out Dan Carlin. So, and he's also has a new book called Not Afraid, on Fear, Heartbreak, Raising a Baby, and Cage Fighting. And we talk about that book too in this podcast, so definitely check that out. He's written a few other books too on religion and other stuff, so really interesting guy. Every time I have him on, it's always a really thought-provoking and interesting conversation because he's one of those guests that I could just have on. And like I told him at the end of the show, I had a bunch of notes that I didn't even get to because I can talk to him about anything. And a lot of times in the conversation, I'll just be like, oh, I'm intrigued with his opinion on this or his opinion on that. So he's just a fun guy because no matter what we're talking about, he has a really well thought out, interesting opinion on it. So I enjoy that. Also, if you want to see the video version of this episode, go to our YouTube channel and subscribe to RV Theory 6, or you can just look up the Ripple Effect Podcast on YouTube and you can find our YouTube channel. I also just added a playlist with a bunch of documentaries. So if you're ever just looking for documentaries, something to watch on a rainy day or snowy day or just a Friday or Saturday night, check out our YouTube channel and you can see, just go to the documentaries playlist and you can go there and just see a bunch of free documentaries. They're all pretty good. They're all worth watching. There's some really, I'd say like 90% of them are really, really good. And then there's some that are poor quality, of course, but there's some documentaries in high definition too. So definitely check them out. And they're all topics that we talk about on this podcast, like, the history of the Bushes or history of religion or the Middle East or, just even some other things that are just out of left field that's not typical, but tons of just really interesting stuff. They're all promised to be thought-provoking and different. Not that I agree with every single thing said in every single documentary, but they're all at least worth watching and interesting. And also on our YouTube channel, you can find the new Theory 6 album. I put the whole album out in stereo, full high quality version on our YouTube channel, including the lyric videos and the music videos all on one video. So check that out. That's on our YouTube channel in the playlist called Theory 6, which is my music project. And in the show notes, you can always find the links to my music project. And if you ever want to support the show, definitely do that. You can purchase the music anywhere you can find digital downloads. So check that out and support the show because I get a lot of downloads, not a whole lot of buys of the music. And either one, people don't like the music, or two, they just, they just want to listen and really don't feel the need to support because they get so many podcasts for free, which I understand too. But if you want to support the show and you don't even like the music, then purchase a song just to support the show, if you want to do that. So it's just an alternative to donating directly. And some of the music's all different. For people might listen to the first song on the track and it's really heavy, and then I have War for Peace, which is completely trance electronic and kind of danceable and very limited vocals, and and then I have The Ripple Effect, which is the song that really influences podcasts, which also they have these songs, the techno songs, the trance songs with less vocals, have a lot of samples from people we like Dennis McKenna, who is going to be on the podcast very soon, and Graham Hancock, and all these people, Joe Rogan, and people that I'm sure you're a fan of. So I think it's interesting. So if you don't like one song, please check out another song. Every song is completely different. So do that. And I think that's it for now. Thanks a lot, everybody who's been sticking with the show since the beginning and the new listeners. And I'll see you on the next one. Peace.
works or no?
I hear you. Yeah.
Now you hear me? Okay. Well, maybe it wasn't plugged in right or something.
Yeah, I've done that. There's so many times that things go wrong, and then you're just like, "What the fuck is going on?" And sometimes, and sometimes it's just as simple, like you said. Like a lot of times, I just don't plug something in completely in or whatever. So, but last second, you're like scrambling around, and it's happened. Yeah. Well, it's not quite as bad. When I used to play music, it was the worst. When you first go on stage and you sound test everything, the first song's always the scariest because you don't know what it sounds like or what's going to turn on or what, you know. So once you get that first song out of the way, you're usually pretty good. But that first song was always a little scary.
I bet. I can imagine.
But thanks a lot for being with me. I really appreciate it. I know you're a busy man. One thing I really appreciate is I can't believe how quickly you email people back. You are so consistent with your emailing. It's because I know you're busy because obviously you have a huge fan base. Yeah. You're an author, podcaster now with your history podcast. So obviously a huge fan base. I mean, you just put your email address out there. It's where anybody can retrieve it and get a hold of you. And it's amazing how consistent you are with getting back to people. Because I mean, obviously doing podcasts, we do a lot of emailing with people trying to get guests on and stuff. And sometimes, I mean, I've had guests. Your good friend Thaddeus Russell. It took me like a year to get him on, and then like the dumbass I am, I actually forgot to hit record when I had a 2-hour conversation with him. Yeah, luckily So like that's I actually had Skype software that recorded the Skype conversation, so I had to touch that up and try to use that. Nice, but that's I'm kind of a dumbass. But
that helps.
Yeah, but it's amazing how. You're that one guest that every time you and James Corbett, like every time I email you guys are so quick, and I know you guys are busy. I mean, is that just something you're really a stickler with? You're like, I want to try to get back to people, and
yeah, because I mean, it's a pain in the ass to like sometime like last few days has been like 300 messages a day, and I'm just like, fuck, I can't do this. You know, this is driving me nuts. At the same time, it's not that if I delay it until tomorrow, then tomorrow I'm going to get back to them because there's going to be 300 more, you know. So it's either I do it right now or it's never going to happen, you know. So either you go on a sort of top celebrity guy who decide not to reply to anybody, and then that's a different story. Or if you do it, you got to do it consistently because otherwise you drown. And, you know, if you let a day go by, then you have a zillion more from the day before plus 2 days. So, you know, it gets pretty intense.
You ever think of doing like a Chris Ryan thing where you have somebody else take care of your emails, or Dan Carlin? I know he has, some people take care of his emails. You ever think about doing something like that? Or do you like having the one-on-one connection with your fans?
Yeah, because I mean, it's like, it's kind of hard to have somebody else take care of it because a lot of it is sort of a personal thing. You know, I need to know when I'm free, if I'm scheduling something. I need to know what the deal is if like somebody writing me something more personal. You know, it's like, it's not really that you can get somebody else to do it, you know.
Yeah, so you're adding a middleman, but they still have to go through to you and ask you the same questions anyways.
It doesn't really help it. So it's but yeah, some days it's better than others. Some days I'm like, oh, cake, no problem, it's not that much. And other days you're like, Jesus, stop. You know, and the problem is everybody's nice and it's not a pain, you know, people. So you can be an ass to people who are being nice to you or who are interested in your stuff. It's just like, I need time away from a computer, you know. It's like,
oh, absolutely. Well, you're like me. You're active. You know, you do martial arts. You like to stay active, and so it's sitting in front of a computer. It can be torture for if you're there long enough because it's like I shut down my body. I feel lazy. I feel like I should fast right after I'm done because I'm like I haven't done anything. I don't deserve food. You know, it's but
it is it's a delicate balance. But I think like one of my pet peeves, I absolutely hate when you reach out to people and they don't reply. I just find it so damn rude that it really pisses me off. And so I really kind of don't want to do that to other people.
Yeah. I used to get, when I first started this podcast, I used to see a lot more of that. Now people seem to at least give me the closure of saying, hey, we're busy. So at least that way I can mentally move on. And I appreciate, even if it's something simple like, hey, we just can't at the moment, hit us up again in the summer or the fall or whatever. So that alone makes it a little easier. And I think that's, you know, it's hard too because I'm a podcaster, but I forget there's a billion podcasters out there, and everybody's trying to get a hold of you guys. Everybody's trying to
Sure.
get a hold of a lot of the same people. So you can't say yes to everybody. And I think it gets to a point where you do have to filter them out, which I've been very lucky because people like yourself who came on my show very early in the beginning of this show and were very nice to come on. And like I think I've said to you in the past, I could have easily done a handful of shows and gave up, and then not to say I wasted your time, because I think we always learn something from
Sure.
these conversations, but in some sense it's like wasted your time because I pretend I'm serious enough to have you on, and then I just give up on it, So
Right.
it was very nice, and now I've had people like Jesse Ventura on, and
Nice.
Abraham Bolden, who was the first Black Secret Service agent on a presidential detail. So it's amazing the people I'd be able to talk to. And in a way, it's kind of I do it for many reasons, but in one of the reasons, or it's kind of selfish, because I get to talk to all these amazing people that I look
Absolutely.
up to. Yeah, so.
Absolutely. No, that's half of the fun is right there, is being able to make those connections, which is kind of hard to say, hey, I'm just going to call you. It's like,
Yeah.
podcast is a little easier to justify it. And it's, and that's funny. Like I get in waves. Like I have periods where I don't get too many podcast guest requests. And then I get periods where everybody at the same time is emailing me. So sometimes like I just push it as, hey, why don't we email me in a month? And then, if they are still there in a month, hopefully that wave has ended and I can actually fix it up in a way that makes sense. But yeah, it gets pretty crazy.
Yeah. Well, I think the podcast world has slowed down a little bit in the sense that I think when they first started getting really popular, I think that everybody realized how easy it was. And then a lot of people attempted it, and then they gave up. And really, I can't say it's hard, because the hardest part is dealing with like the anxiety of maybe talking to somebody you're a fan of, or just gathering your thoughts when you're scatterbrained. I've done that, where I'm just like, I have 1,000 different things I want to talk to somebody about, and then I end up ranting for 10 minutes and not getting one question out,
Right.
So but I think that's also some aspect people love about it. You were just on the Rogan podcast, and I think that something people love about Rogan's podcast, your podcast, Duncan Trussell's podcast, Chris Ryan's podcast, is you guys really put yourselves out there. You talk about your personal life, you talk about your personal feelings and experiences, and I think people like that, because there's a lot, like I see a lot of downloads. The cool thing about podcasts are downloaded all over the world, but in the US, when I see certain states where I know that it's not maybe some of the people downloading don't live in a city and aren't, you could see how you can want a connection with somebody who talks about these topics that are really interesting, but you might live in a small little town where you don't have people who have the similar interests. So it's your way of kind of hanging out with friends, talking about things you want to talk about, even if you don't have those friends living locally.
Definitely. No, that's exactly how it is. It makes a huge difference. And, compared to the days pre these kind of technologies where all you had were, mainstream newspaper, mainstream TV channels, mainstream, which provide something that will appeal to some people and will not be something that a lot of people can relate to. Now there's kind of a niche for everyone, really.
And what do you like having raising a daughter, and I have a son? One thing I always think about is how technology kind of, it seems like it brings us together, but in many ways it brings us further from each other, because you'll see a bunch of people at a bar or at a table, and instead of actually communicating, they're text messaging or on social media, or so they're digitally talking about how much fun they're having instead of actually being in the moment and having the fun that they're bragging about. But is that something you worry about, like digital?
I mean, it's kind of I think it's like anything else. It's balance. It's figuring out how much you can use it and you gain all the advantages of using it, and how much you start using you where you're just addicted to this thing and you forget that there's real life, that you have a physical body and all of that. So it really is. It's like anything that you enjoy. If you overdo it, then it becomes horrible for you. It's something that starts consuming you and not helping you anymore. Whereas if you use, it really is boiled down to the difference between use and abuse. And sometimes, of course, that line is not that thin. It's a little tricky to figure out when you're going overboard. So it's a constant process of using. Oh, I'm going overboard. Oh, I definitely went overboard. Okay, now we need to diet, so to speak, and cut it down severely. And then you start building back up again, and then you do it over and over like that.
Yeah, it's kind of an interesting debate because I just recently I had my buddy Dave, who's my co-host a lot of the times on this show, which you've met on previous shows. We were watching the UFC fight, and then after the fight we were just talking and drinking, and we got into the debate about how me and another friend were talking about how similar thing, how technology, how people aren't really paying attention to each other. They're on social media and this and that. And he made a really good point about how I'm sure people talked about the rotary phone the same way. Oh, you're spending all this time on the rotary phone instead of talking in person or whatever. So we keep thinking that things are going to change or that things are going to make things worse, but maybe technology is advancing faster than humanity, and society just has to adapt to it. And but it does, and then it brings up kind of an interesting conversation, like Rogan has said on his podcast numerous times about this idea that, and not just him, but a lot of futurists have said the same thing, where man and machine are combining into one, because it just seems like little by little that's the direction we're going, where it's we keep. Technology isn't just a part of our lives, but it's almost become our lives, where we spend.
Yeah, and I think the danger there is forgetting the physical, where you are no longer in touch with the physical. And that's where you get really screwed up, because there is the idea that our thoughts can exist regardless of what our physical state is. This disembodied idea is a really bad idea, because the reality is that where you are at physically has a huge impact on your mind, on your thoughts, on what you say to other people, and everything else. So I'm all for technologies that allow us to bypass some limitations. Those are great. At the same time, you cannot forget the physical element, because it's not just that you're missing the other half of experience, but you're also missing, even in the mental aspect, you end up missing out, because the physical does affect the mental in deep ways. The kind of thoughts that you can come up with when you are in a healthy, strong physiological state are not the same kind of thought that you can come up with when you are in this weekend, I spend 20 hours in front of the computer kind of state. So it affects both at the same time.
Well, I think it's similar to the idea, if it was just as easy as using technology to connect, then Skype would take off, and you could Skype instead of talking. I mean, obviously we're Skyping at the moment, but there's still something about when I have somebody in studio or at the house, or you're sitting down and having a meal with somebody and you're there physically, there's something missing through the digital technology. Like there's I can't put it into words, but that there's just a sense of connection, the way a conversation flows. It's much easier in person than it is through. I mean, I'm sure, like yourself, you have people live on your show or in person,
sure.
On your show, and when you're on Rogan podcast and other podcasts where you're there. I mean, do you sense that it's much easier to kind of just chill and just bullshit than it is when you're talking via phone call or Skype?
I mean, you can make some really good things through Skype and phone call, absolutely. But of course, when you're there face to face, you get a different level of communication too, that I think it adds a layer to it. Somebody just today was asking me on Twitter what do I think about the growth of online education and more stuff being online courses and stuff like that. And I mean, on one end, it's convenient for sure. There are some elements about it that are pretty cool. But then there's one of the main elements of it all, which is the interaction among students, which happen face to face. And I don't even mean in educational purposes. I mean as in when the class is over, you go have coffee together or something, and you become friends, which you wouldn't if it's just Mr. So-and-so wrote his opinion down. I don't get a read for that person. I don't get, never mind hooking up with hot women, but, all of that. You want that physical presence there, that physical interaction. Otherwise, to me, like if college education was just about what you learn in the classroom, just go read some fucking books. It's really, you don't really need a lot of what. Whereas to me, the most important part of the things is the interaction with other people that you meet in the classrooms. That's where the whole thing gets interesting. So it's a fine line. I think there's a place to use it. There are ways that can simplify things. At the same time, you lose something out when you don't have the physical dimension attached to it.
Now, being a part, and you bringing this up reminds me of what Thaddeus is doing with the Renegade. Well, I don't think does he have a name for it yet? His class?
I think it's a Renegade University.
Yes, Renegade University. And I think you're absolutely right. I think there is. I mean, the cool thing about technology is that somebody like myself who barely graduated high school went into the, I guess for lack of a better term, the real world and worked a full-time job right out of high school. I felt like there was a lack of the muscle of my brain. Like I could work out, I can exercise the rest of my body, but my brain just felt like it was lagging. Like I had this thirst for knowledge. And the cool thing about technology was that I could go online, I could read things, I could watch lectures, and I didn't have to go to a university to do that. But I still, like you said, I still think there's something about these conversations you can have in person and these connections that a conversation will go down a road that it might never go when you're just, obviously it can't go when you're just watching a lecture or something like that. So I think that is very important because, just feeding off each other, asking questions and immediately getting an answer, that's so important compared to just, this is my philosophy or this is what I'm teaching, this is the information, here it goes. I don't have the opportunity to ask questions and interact.
Yeah, and even think about the people you meet. If you don't go to school and if you work at some smaller job where you have 10 people in an office or something, how many people did you get to meet in a year? New people, it's a fairly low number because you're gonna go to the party of your friend who has 20 of his friends over or something. You're gonna go, but realistically you meet very few, and considering that you're not gonna click exactly with everybody, or even the ones you click with can be clicking a little, but they are not. The number of people that you get to choose from, who are going to be your friends, who's gonna be in a relationship with you, all of that is so damn small that you really don't have much of a choice. Whereas if you go in environments where you have a lot of people, where you get to meet 50 people in a class, 50 in another, 100 here, you get to see a lot more human beings, and the odds are after you go, no, the odds that you run into somebody that you can click with are a lot higher. Otherwise, I can see why people get desperate and they're all online dating or shit like that, because it's you don't meet people in day-to-day level. You don't meet them face-to-face. There are no places, there's no environments where you get to meet other human beings that much. People don't go to bars anymore, and for good reason probably, because that's not exactly the best scenario for. So how exactly do you meet other human beings? There are not that many environments that are conducive to that.
No, you're absolutely right. There's a lot to say about that. I think that's probably why online dating has gotten so popular, and Tinder and all these things, because like you said, you go to your job, you see the same people. We spend much more time doing the things we have to do than things we'd like to do. If we had more time for hobbies and stuff, maybe you would interact with people and stuff like that. But most people go to work, they come home, take care of their priorities, they sleep, they do the same thing over and over again. And if you're looking for a companion or looking for somebody to connect with, sometimes it's much easier, like you said, to go on a phone app or go on a website and look and see what you have in common. But yeah, it's weird because we've lost something in America with I had CJ Werleman on. He's from Australia, the writer, and he was talking about how pub culture in Australia, how they still sit around and they talk and they conversate, at a bar. Where in America, it's so true. Like I have cigar and whiskey parties, and a lot of the reason, and I love cigars and whiskey, but the most enjoyable part of it is the fact that I have a reason to sit my friends down, put our phones aside, all actually talk to each other and conversate, and just being together for a couple hours where we can talk about, because when I was single, one thing that never really hit me was how many times we would get a group of friends together, we'd go out, but we would never talk. We'd go out, we'd go to a bar where it had loud music, and we're all watching the game on TV, or we're checking out the girls who walk by, and me and my buddies can hang out every weekend, but I have no idea what's going on in his personal life. I don't know if he's starting a new job or what's going on, at home. So it's there's something that we're missing with that, where you look at in Massachusetts where I live now is I remember seeing this documentary about how alcohol influenced the world, and how Massachusetts, every city and town had to have a pub, and it was against the law not to. And people would go to church, which didn't have heat most of the time, then go next door to their pub, which did have heat, and people would sit there and talk, and they would share ideas. And it's that's what we're missing out on, is this time to and I think that's why yoga got popular. I think a lot of these things that help you gather your thoughts, sit down, meditate, and all these, because I think we're overstressed, we're overworked. Like I said before, if you look at the percentage of your lifespan that you're doing things you have to do, priorities, and the percentage of your lifespan you do things you actually enjoy doing, it's very much one-sided, which is probably why there's this epidemic of antidepressants and suicide, and the reason why alcohol sales are always consistently going up. People, because I think people are looking for that thing that helps them get through the day. And I know Dr. Carl Hart, his philosophy on addiction. I get in these debates with people all the time because he's completely changed the way I look at addiction. This idea that, I had a conversation with a buddy not too long ago, and he's an engineer. He works on alternative energy, and he was talking about when he was in college, him and his buddy would, because I was talking to him about Carl Hart, and he was talking about how him and his buddy, they both went to parties, and they would, every once in a while, they do a little bit of coke. There'd be some coke, and he's like, I kind of was there, and I'm like, fuck it, why not? And he's like, but he just did it, and after college, he never touched it again. He's like, his buddy became an addict, and I'm like, okay, now look at what was different in each other's lives. And he's like, well, he didn't have a stable family life. He didn't have parents that cared about him. He didn't have a relationship. He didn't have a girlfriend. He didn't have a career that he knew he wanted to get into. He's like, I was much more stable, was dating, knew what I was doing for work after college, all this stuff. And maybe that was the factors. It wasn't the fact that cocaine was any more addictive to him than it was the other guy, So, again, I'm pretty sure I went on a rant, and there's no question in that.
No, definitely. That makes perfect sense. And I think that, the overall health of people's life, we've made a huge improvements in quality of life in some ways, and we are kind of screwing it up in other ways. So it's kind of a mixed bag where you have some great advantages that come from modern living, and some huge disadvantages at the same time. So it's like, it's not that you have to throw out modern living and go back to the way things were 200 years ago. You have to take the best of what exists today and figure out how you can tweak it so it doesn't come with the downfalls. The way you get the best of both worlds. But yeah, man, it's tricky, because think about it, when people are in a relationship and they're all like, oh, my soulmate and this and that, it's like, really? Because you met about probably 500 people that you had to pick from. There are about 7 billion people out there. You just pick the least annoying person out of the extremely few that you run into. That's about it. Yeah. That's not really exactly a huge choice.
It's like I forget which comedian said I'd love to give him credit for it, but he's like, if there's only one person out there for me, they better live fucking close, because he's like, there's billions of people in the world, and it's so true. You find somebody you're more compatible with, and then you try to make it work. And I think that's I think that's why breakups are so hard for people, because obviously when you're young and you're very emotional and you feel you meet this person that you did everything was the first with them, and then all of a sudden they're gone and you never rebounded. It's hard to believe that you can rebound. But I think that a little bit has to do with the fact that people believe that there's a such thing as soulmates, or you meet this person and they're the one, and then when it doesn't work out, you're heartbroken because you think that you can never regain that again. You'll never find somebody who loves you quite as much, or you love quite as much, or you have this in common or that in common. But like I always tell people, when you meet somebody new, you won't love them for their similarities of your ex, but you'll love them for who they are, because I think initially we instantly try to find out, does this person have the things that I loved about my ex, I think you're just going down a road of disaster, because you're never going to replace that person. There's only, you've dealt with it, and everybody, anybody who's been through a heartbreak has definitely dealt with it. And I think that's something we have to keep telling our friends. I have friends as adults who go through breakups like they're kids, and I think that when you see that from the outside looking in, you realize, when I was a kid and I was in a relationship, my parents used to look at me and be like, oh, it's not real, you don't know what love is. And then I become an adult and I analyze my parents' relationship. I'm like, fuck, man, you guys don't know what love is. I'm like, you guys don't have anything any more figured out than I did when I was 17. I'm like, so it's amazing, this idea that we look at kids and what they feel, and we act like what they feel isn't real because they don't know yet. And then you look at adults and they don't have shit figured out either. They go through breakups just as bad in some cases as kids. They'll be just as head over heels over somebody as children will. So it is funny how we and I think you talked about this with Aubrey Marcus once, about this idea that we never really go in some cultures, something happens where you feel like, okay, I'm an adult now. And like with modern culture, we don't ever have that stepping stone where like all of a sudden I'm an adult. I mean, when I became a parent, I'm sure you probably had a similar experience. And I remember I had Eddie Bravo on and we talked about this, because it seems like everybody you talk to that has a child has the same experience. You're leaving the hospital and you're just like, what the fuck, man? Like, I have to keep this thing alive. Like, there's like, I don't feel like I just became an adult just because I forgot to pull out once. It's like, it's like I shouldn't get a trophy and have like, so it's amazing how all of a sudden it's like you just have to step up to the plate, but there's nobody helped you through it. Nobody got you there. Nobody said, okay, you took these courses, you listened to these lectures, and now you're prepared. All of a sudden it's just like you just have to do it. And and I think that there's something lacking with that, where we don't ever feel like there's no transition from becoming a kid and then becoming an adult, which in some way I think is good, because honestly I don't feel any different than I do when I was a kid. I mean, I like the same shit. I still love metal music. I still like comic books. I still like playing basketball and martial arts. So it's just a lot of things haven't changed. So that's a good thing. But there is a sense of like people not feeling like they're prepared yet for being a parent, because they don't realize their parents were also not prepared, and we all had the same feeling. Because like one thing I tell my wife is it's funny, because I'm like, the same way you look at your parents, like when you were a kid, you looked at them like they had all the answers. I'm like, and like they had these profound things to say and they knew right from wrong. I'm like, our child's gonna look at us like that, and I'm like, and guess what, we don't have all the answers, and I don't have anything profound to say. And so it is a weird transition, and so again, I'm not sure I have any questions. That was just a little good. But do you think that's the issue with our culture, is that the fact that we don't have that transition, or do you think that it's actually a good thing? Like I said, the fact that we can just feel like kids forever and not have to really feel like, oh, there's a such thing as being an adult. You're just a person who evolved.
Well, I mean, I think there's something to be said. Yes, sure, the person who evolved, everything, that's great. You can have certain qualities that you keep for your whole life, and there's no such a thing as growing up in that sense, and I'm done with that. At the same time, it's probably good to have some kind of transitional ritual where you feel that is not designed to change you, it's not designed to get rid of the good stuff that you had at one stage, it's designed to empower you a little more. It's not about trading a set of values and fun for another set that may not be as fun. It's about enlarging who you are, just expanding who you are, adding on, not taking away. All the good stuff that you enjoy from your childhood, all the good stuff that you enjoy from all that, let's keep it. But let's add the stuff that makes you feel more ready and well prepared to handle other things.
Yeah, and I think one thing you can learn from being a kid is, and I've said this, I apologize to my listeners because I'm sure they've heard this before, but is the fact that as kids, you realize that the things they enjoy the most are experiences, being around your parents, hanging out, being together, throwing a ball. Like, you can be that parent who's never around and buy your kid the best gift ever every holiday, and guess what? That kid's gonna grow up thinking you're a shitty parent, regardless. Sure. Sure. But if you're poor and broke and you still just spend all your time together or spend as much quality time as possible, you guys are gonna have a great bond and relationship. And I think as we get older, Edward Bernays and Sigmund Freud's nephew and public relations and marketing has told us that what makes us happy is materialism and buying things. But yet, I think if we look at when we're kids, or you just look at children, if you're around them, like, we're not different. Like, before marketing brainwashes you into believing these things make you happy, honestly, what truly makes you happy are the things like, the times you laughed with your friends, went out to eat, or you got too drunk and a buddy puked all over the place or stumbled and fell, and I think that's what we need to kind of focus on, is the fact that I think we've been, I guess for a lack of a better word, brainwashed into believing that materialism is where happiness comes, and I think Chris Ryan's new book, he kind of hits on this a little bit, the one that he's in the process of writing, about like, has civilization actually is it evolving, and is it are we better off now? Or because we have more shit, are we technically better off? Or, you can find some tribal people who lived in the woods, 1,000 years, who never had a cell phone, and guess what? They don't need a cell phone. They're happy as hell, So
yeah, I think it's it's a double thing. I think there are some things that you lose and some things that you gain. So my whole game is not to moan about the good old days, because they are gone anyway, and it's not either to embrace the future is the way to go, because we are also losing some good stuff. It's about figuring out a way to get the two together, to figure out how we can get the best of. And I think really one of the big problems is the lack of community, the lack of tribal living, the lack of these super individualized, lonely lives where people go to work, come back home, watch TV, go to sleep, repeat, do it again, where you don't really have that much of an interaction with other human beings other than in very limited format. And that, no wonder then you need, the antidepressants and the materialism go hand in hand in that regard, because what happens is you're lonely, you don't have the experiences that make you feel alive. So what do? You need to, well, I'm making money, at least I can buy myself something cool, and you feel a little better about your shitty life. But because you just spent a bunch of money, that means you're even more tied to the job that makes you unhappy because you're miserable and lonely and you don't really have the life you want. But so you are more depressed, so you buy yourself more stuff to feel a little better about your shitty life, and now you're tied to it even more, and it's this vicious cycle that just never lets you out. That's, to me, that's not a healthy way of living. Now, I'm not saying then, civilization sucks. No, I mean, there are some awesome things about living here and now today. They are brilliant. They are beautiful. It's about figuring out how can we keep the best of what we have, which there's a lot, and it's great, but tweaking it in a direction that's a little healthier, that leads to a better lifestyle. And again, individually, people can do it. There are some people who can make it happen for themselves in a brilliant way. As a society, we're not really going that way. So it's important to figure out how can we combine, how can we really get the best from the past, from a tribal world in a way, and combine it with the advantages that modern technologies give us.
Yeah, it's funny because you figure, like, since the beginning of figuring out or coming up with technologies and coming up with tools, it's like before we were cavemen, and then we evolved, and then as we came up with tools, you figured the less time we spend. Oh, you need a second? Are you good?
No, I'm good.
And you figured as you evolve, the more tools you come up with, you'd be creating, because the purpose of them, or at least it seemed like the purpose of it at one time, was to have more free time. So it's like if I made a bow and arrow, it'd be easier to kill something instead of me hunting it and stabbing it, And so it's like you keep trying to come up with technologies that have more free time, and then it got to a point where like it went in reverse. Now we have all this technology, but we're not using it for more free time. I think it was Douglas Ruskoff who I've had on the show before, and he talked about how we have enough technology where we could all work like a week a year, like where machines could do, most things, and it just, I mean, maybe it's capitalism. More likely that it probably is capitalism, this idea that we need to keep this capitalistic machine going. And, but, I don't think that type of world is something that couldn't exist. I think we just have to change people's consciousness. And I think that, and I just talked about this on the last podcast, was how I think the power of money is disappearing, because I think that people my generation and younger not my generation, because internet was still fairly new when I was growing up, but younger than me, who grew up with internet, they're used to getting everything for free. They're used to getting, like when we were growing up, if we wanted to watch a movie, we had to rent a VHS, we had to buy a CD, we had to buy a or 8-track or whatever, a cassette, and now it's like literally everything you want you can get for free. And, so money is losing its power. It's losing its capability. And I wonder if enough of that happens where people will be like, well, we don't really need money. We have all this technology where we can get shit for free. And then we don't, and maybe that will spark the transition of, maybe a Zeitgeist type of philosophy, world, like in their documentary Moving Forward, where technology can just do all the physical hard work for us and we can just spend more time doing things we enjoy, so.
Yeah, and I think that would be obviously interesting and awesome transition. It would also be a less than easy one, because I think the majority of people have no fucking clue what to do with themselves if they are not tied to a job they hate 9 hours a day. And I think that's in some ways exactly what becoming an adult is, in some ways, figuring out. As a kid, you often end up being bored because there are only so many games you can play. There's only so much. So there's also that moment where you're a kid where you don't know what to do with yourself, where you're trying to which is why then TV or stuff like that comes in, because it's easy. You press a button, there's some kind of entertainment, keeps you going for a while. But like figuring out, like if you have all the time in the world and no obligations, how would you spend it? How would you? I think a lot of people would seriously struggle. They would not know what to do with themselves, which of course that does not mean that's fine. That's okay. You don't know what to do with yourself and then you learn. But it wouldn't be like, oh yay, I have all the time in the world and now happiness is here, because most people would panic. They would be like, oh shit, okay, I've done this thing, I've done that thing, now what? I don't know what I want, because I don't know really who I am. I don't know what I'm about. I don't know what I enjoy, because we have lived in a way that never really encouraged people to figure it out, what it is that if they had all the time in the universe, what would they be doing? It's not really an exercise that we practice. And I think it's one that we badly need to practice, because the reality is we don't have the time to do even a fraction of all the things we would like to do. But once you start putting pen to paper and you realize just how much stuff is there that you could enjoy, it's stimulating, because in some ways, like, you're never going to be bored again. There's just not a possibility. The problem is not being bored. The problem is you're never going to have enough time to do all the things you would like to do. But really, to most people, I think the freeing them from their chains is a favor up to a point, in the sense that, yes, in the great scheme of things, is a favor, because you're trying to, every time you free somebody from chains is a good thing in some way. But it's not that somebody who's been shackled all their life, the second you take off the chains, they are going to know what to do with it. In some way, they're going to panic, because they don't know what it means to be a free human being who can make choices. They have been, most people complain about their job, not enough to change it, but they are like, this kind of sucks. But if you give them all the time in the world, they don't know what to do with themselves, because they have never really psychologically played that game. And it's not, and again, it's not even a judgment. It's not like, oh, you're a bad person because you don't know what to do with yourself. Hey, maybe that's just the way it played out, the way your parents raised you, the way school played out, the way society has pushed you, there's a failure, there's a systemic failure there. But still, at the end of the day, it's your life. So unless you figure out a way to make it happen, you are a cog in a machine, and you go through your life and then you're dead, and there's really no point to it.
Now, I think you made a good point, and I think that how much do you think school has to do with that? Because I think a lot of it has to do, like I tell people all the time, because I write music and I used to write poetry and I do things that are somewhat creative, and there's, as I'm sure you have friends that just aren't creative at all, and they look at you and like, well, Daniele, how do you write a book? How do you do this? Like, how do you do these creative things? They don't get it. And I always tell people, I'm like, it's not that you can't do it, it's that we could all do it at one point. Like when you look at kids, we're all good at doodling on our papers, coloring, playing with blocks and imagining something, but we get to a point where we turn our creativity off. Like we get to a point where it's like, now I'm in the real world, now it's just like, I'm a machine, I just do my tasks, what I'm told to do, and that's it. And you have limited flexibility to be creative and stuff. Now, how much do you think schooling has a part to do with it? Well, how do you, if we had a school system that really the focus was kind of getting people's provoking thought and getting people to be creative, then when they got out of school or when they became adults and they had to look for something to do, they would be much more creative. Because even when I was a kid, I was I was never really bored, but I'm much more less bored now because there's 1,000 documentaries I want to watch. I'll never have time to watch 1,000 books. I have a bunch of books over here, including some of yours that I never got through the whole book because you just can't find the time to do it. So anytime I talk to somebody or I see on Facebook or Twitter and somebody says they're bored, I'm like, what the fuck is wrong with bored? I'm like, there's a billion things I wish I had time to do, So, so how much do you think, changing the way we look at school and what it should be, because I think do you think now it's because they're focusing on preparing people for this type of society, this type of culture, or let's focus on the things that will get you a good job instead of focusing on the things that let's make you a thinker and interesting, and is that the issue?
Well, I think there's part of the problem is who's making the decisions. It's like if the majority of people are stuck in that system and they don't know any other way, of course, the product they will create, in this case a school system they will create, is not going to be a particularly creative one. And even if you have one person at the top who encourage school in a completely different direction, but then who do you hire? who are the thousands upon thousands of teachers you hire who have it, who have a different kind of experience, and they are not simply. It requires a lot of people to be really talented, and that's not easy. And I don't mean talented in this kind of life experience talented. So it's not exactly an easy thing, because you need to have a top bureaucracy, which, top bureaucracies are never exactly the places where great ideas come from, but you would need some kind of the system itself to encourage going in that direction. Plus, you would need to staff it with all kind of people who have that ability. Because, I see sometimes you can have the best idea in the world, but then you look at who the people doing the teaching are, and it's going to suck. It doesn't matter how good of an idea it is. If that person teaches it, it's going to turn out to crap because they don't have it. You look at their faces, and it's like the last thing you want to hear from these people, is like, we're going to inspire to. No, with that face, you're never going to inspire anybody. I don't care how good of a book you go by. I don't care how good the plan is. That person is not going to do it unless they themselves change. But as they are right now, it's not going to happen. And I think it's part of the reason why, it's funny, they did these studies in college, how they ask, students to rate their professors about 5 minutes on the first day, and then rate them at the end of the semesters. And almost unfailingly, the rating never changed. The people that student liked 5 minutes in are the same people that got really high marks at the end, and the people they didn't like 5 minutes in were the same professors that they didn't like at the end of the semester. How do you know? Is because 5 minutes in you know how much knowledge they have? No, it's about the quality of the person that they bring to the table. The knowledge factor is almost secondary. It's who you are and what kind of energy you bring to the table is what makes all the difference in the world. So it's like you can take the best system in the world, but you hand it to the wrong people, it's going to suck. You take the best idea in the world and you give it to people who don't have that spark, and it's not going to deliver, It's kind of like if your gym, take something like sex ed, right? Is it a good idea for kids in school to have sex ed? Sure, of course it's a good idea. But if he's your 300-pound math teacher who give you the sex ed thing, it makes you want to shoot yourself. It's like the idea can be good, even what is taught can be good, but the idea that that person teaches you about sex ed grosses you out, and you're like,
pick somebody that I actually don't throw up if I see naked.
Yeah, stuff like who the person is makes a huge difference. Hang on 1 second. What do you need, love?
Where's the baking sheet?
I don't know, love. I think, second, if you face the sink, there are 3 sinks down there, the second one. Okay.
Hashtag daddy life.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I had an episode with Robbie Martin. You know Abby Martin? Her brother was on, and my wife had to go to work, and she handed me the baby. And so the last 15 minutes, he was on my lap, and then I was talking to him, and he started laughing. He took the foam off. He was chewing on it, and I'm like, dude, you never stop being a dad. But the cool thing about kids, life never stops being interesting. It's.
I did a podcast with I think 3 Rogan experiences ago. I had it where I didn't have a babysitter, so my daughter had to come with me.
I heard that one where you had her, at the.
Yeah, Joe was. I could kind of think because I'm used to it, so it was like he's kind of distracting, but not that bad. Joe was distracted as hell. He just kept looking at what this little monkey in my lap was doing. I was just like, and I think he's like, so I was like, shit, I can't do this to people because it's my thing. It doesn't mean that they can or should deal with it,
Yeah. Well, I think, he's a father, so I think he loves kids too. I think if having kids, I think you definitely love kids. It was weird because I think I remember you apologizing, like, I'm so sorry for, and I remember Joe just being like, oh, don't worry about it, so it seemed like he, it didn't bother me. He probably just found it more entertaining than anything, but
right.
Yeah, it is funny because it's like I remember it was like a random Sunday and me and the wife were just running around with the kid, and remember when we were dating and we used to be hungover on Sundays and just sleep in, and it's like no more of that, and there's a good thing. It gives you a reason to get up in the morning and be active and get the blood flowing, so there's definitely pros and cons to it.
Right, no, definitely.
But let's say before we get too late, let's talk about your book and your podcast. So History on Fire. awesome podcast. I'm so glad you're jumping in, into that whole realm, because honestly, I love Dan Carlin, but obviously with all the researching and the lack of ability to put out so much of it so quickly, I'm like, there's a hole in the market. There's
Sure.
There's room for a couple more there's a lot of room, and I'm sure it's similar to Joe Rogan and him provoking people to start their own show. I'm sure Dan Carlin and you guys are the same way. Even though you guys are doing history podcasts, you'll be more than happy. The more the merrier. And so it's awesome that you got into that, because while people are waiting for Dan Carlin's show, hey, you know what? History on Fire came out, the new one, and put that out. And like you've talked about on many occasions, the time it takes to research this shit and get a whole episode. So for somebody who doesn't know what I'm talking about, how would you describe your new podcast, History on Fire?
History on Fire kind of takes a epic approach to history. To me, it's like there's so many amazing stories that are part of human history that either we don't teach, or we teach in sucking up all the fun and not really turning them into kind of dry tales that lack the magic and the epic of it all. And it's silly because the magic and the epic is in the stories. There are so many out there. So to me, it's just a matter of picking them and telling them in a good way. Telling them with, like you're telling a Game of Thrones episode, it has a kind of a cinematic quality to it. And yet it's history. You're not making stuff up. It's not popularizing it as in like you're making it somehow less serious. It's very serious, but you can also be entertaining, and that's the whole goal. So I'm all over the place with that podcast, in the sense that I can pick topics from any time period, any geographical space, anything. The only requirement is being exciting, powerful stories. So there's not exactly a lack of those. And I'm playing with that, which is kind of what Dan Carlin has done with hardcore history. He's a bit all over the place. And Dan has been super supportive. He's he retweets regularly when there's like people say, oh man, in between hardcore history, I love having History on Fire. And Dan, far from seeing it as competition, he's super supportive and very nice. And I think also for me it made sense. I mean, I podcast already and I teach history in college. So how about I combine the two and do? It's not like I woke up one day and saw what Dan Carlin is doing and say, I'm going to copy that. It's kind of like, it's sort of a natural step for what I was already doing. And I'm having fun with it. It got pretty big pretty quick, because obviously there's a much bigger market for people who are into history and that tend to see, hey, that's kind of a cool logo, let's see what this podcast is about, than there is for people who knew already who I was and just want to check out what I talk about regardless of topic. So this one has gone pretty big pretty quick. I'm about 5 episodes in. It's a brutal amount of work to prepare. That's why I prepared about 2 years worth of work ahead of time in order to, right now I have stuff prepared for maybe the next 8 to 9 months. So it's a battle to try to research while I produce the new stuff. Because each episode is about 200 hours of work, more or less, which is a lot of work. When it would be a full-time job if I try to release episodes every 6 weeks, which is what I'm trying to do now. So it's eventually it's gonna catch up and the output is gonna slow down. But for now, it should remain on a 6-week range for quite a while.
And how do you, so you teach history, but do you teach the same type of history? Because a lot of times in school, what you learn is military history. You learn history from one perspective, and you're focusing on stories that are much different. History stories that you wouldn't necessarily hear in school or talk about in school. Is that on purpose?
Well, I mean, I think to me, what makes a lot of history fun is make it personal, is going into pop culture, is going into the kind of stuff that allows somebody who listen to put themselves in that place, rather than simply, the king of so-and-so invaded that country in 1637. You get you can see yourself on that street corner in that situation. And I think that's where history comes alive and where people dig it.
And how do you now? I know I've heard Dan Carlin talk about this, and I think I've talked to him about it on my show before, about how hard it is to the resources, or where do you get this information? Like, do you find, because obviously in all history there's conflicting theories, and it seems like the older the history, the more black and white things seem. You know, like when things just happen,
Sure.
you know, there's a lot of conflicting opinions, and then as time goes by, it becomes these are good guys and these are the bad guys, and that's it. You know, and I mean, so do you look for alternative books and alternative viewpoints on the same stories?
Yeah, that's why you don't read one book for one episode. You have to read 20 books for an episode, or whatever many there may be. You know, in some episodes is less, some episodes is more, and because there's so much out there, and the interpretations are so radically different that you have to be able to take into account that not everybody feels the same way. And so what that means is you look at completely opposite viewpoints on the same topic, and then you try to put it together in a cohesive narrative. Now, in one case, if somebody's clearly making a weak argument, you can make your judgment call and say some people argue this, but it's bullshit because of this. In other cases where it's more complex and they are both touching on different aspects of the same story, then you sometimes present the evidence and say, hey, I don't know, you know, this is what some people are arguing. It seems believable because of this one seems like it makes sense because of that, but there's really ultimately no way to prove it. So as long as you're honest about it, and you're, like, for example, in one of the latest episodes I did about the story of the 10,000 Greek mercenaries in this Persian civil war, at one point it talks about the death of a Persian king, and there are at least 3 credible versions of how this guy died, and nobody knows which one is true. And so because it was already a long episode, I didn't get into all 3. I said, you know, there are multiple versions of his death. I picked this one. Is it because I know it's true? No, it's because it's the coolest story, and I like to believe it, you know, whether it's true or not. I don't know, and nobody else does. You know, there are multiple versions. If you're interested, read more into it. This is the one I'm going to tell you just because it makes for the coolest story.
Never let the truth get in the way of a good story.
Well, because the reality is, as long as, and in some cases I may bring up, you know, oh, there's this tale that they tell about this thing that happened. 90% that's legend, you know, and it's okay, you know, you can still tell your story that is cool and powerful, and then go, the realities probably didn't happen for this and that reason, but a lot of people have said that it did and have believed that it did, and so that's also part of the game, right? It's also part of, because the reality of history is that so much of it is interpretation, is controversial, you know, the hard facts are few and far between, and everything between the hard facts you have to tie together in a way that's where a lot of guesswork exists.
What type of history did you teach in college?
I teach American Indian history. I teach U.S. history. I teach history of religions. I teach kind of like
Dibble dabble in a lot of things.
Yeah. I don't dig the specialism of people who just do one thing and one thing only. I like to be all over the place, which makes it so much easier for my podcast, because if I did one thing and one thing only, you know, doing a podcast about Argentinian history between 1650 and 1670 would only get me so far. These allow me to have all of human history at my disposal to jump all over the place.
Oh, absolutely. And is there one type of history that's the most intriguing to you? I mean, do you find religious history or Native American history? What one of them?
All sort of stuff. I really dig all sort of stuff.
Yeah, I'm the same way. I get obsessed with certain historical events and stuff. Like when obviously with the uproar of you know, the Middle Eastern countries being in the news and stuff like that. I got re-obsessed, because I've already been obsessed in the past with like the Israel-Palestinian conflict and
oh man, for that, by the way, check out, there's a podcast called Martyr Made. Check it out, about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. It's brilliant. That dude is like Dan Carlin level ability to tell a story. He only has like 4 episodes out or something like that. His title that's not exactly the most inviting, because you're like, what does that even make? Martyr Made? What is it? You know. So there's a lot of things why he wouldn't be that popular in terms of a hook. But once you start listening to him, the man is good. And he tells, like so far, he took the Israeli-Palestinian thing just from kind of early Zionism to the 1940s or something.
Yeah.
So he's not even in the creation of the State of Israel, and there's so much to that tale. So check him out. He's cool.
Yeah, it's really interesting, because it's amazing how little people know about that whole conflict, and what, you know, and the fact that it all started from Abrahamic religions, and you know how much how many similarities a lot of these religions have. They all come from the same place. Moses is told, is spoken about in all the books, and it's just like there's so many similarities that it's. I think it's important for people to see that, because I think that in modern society we use all these labels like conservative and liberal and Republican, Democrat, Muslim, and Christian. We use them to separate us, but like if you do research, you realize like there's a lot of fucking similarities. And I think it was a video on YouTube where this guy put the cover of the Quran on the Bible and was reading passages from it and talking about how violent it was. And people are like, yeah, and they're like, well, it's actually the Bible. And people are like, oh crap, they didn't realize like, oh shit, the Bible is just as violent, and it's all interpretation, and so I think that's really important. I talk to friends, and I have Muslim friends, I have Christian friends, Jewish friends, and I talk to people all the time, because a lot of Muslim friends, if I have them over, we'll talk about how because I think there's a lack of understanding of their culture and some of their religious beliefs and stuff like that, and the fact that it all came from the same place, and like you said, Zionism is very different than just being Jewish. You can have people don't know the difference. They think, oh, okay, so everybody's a Zionist who's Jewish. It's like no, that's not how it works. And it's all about that land and believing that land belongs to them, and it goes back to World War I and the fall of the Ottoman Empire and creating these borders and all this stuff, and there's a great documentary on it's on YouTube now called Promises and Betrayals, and it's all about how in World War I all these promises that the West made to Muslims, to Jewish people, and all these people, saying that, hey, if you help us take down the Ottoman Empire, we'll give you your own piece of land, and how and what is it, the Sykes-Picot Agreement, which create these imaginary borders. So it's like when you learn history, I think that's the most intriguing part of history, is that how many things today seem to make much more sense when you figure out how we got here. So you learn about this historical event, and you're like, oh fuck, that's why they hate each other. That's why that's a country. That's why those borders exist. So I think, is that one of the reasons why you love history so much, because of it just it seems like it helps understand the world a little better.
It does, for sure. I think there are, multiple levels. It helps you understand, politics. It helps you understand just life, values and priorities, how people have structured their life in some ways, experiments that have worked very well, experiments that have not worked very well. It enlarges our own individual experience, which is by necessity limited. You learn so much more from history, from other people. So I think it's entertaining, it's fun, you got cool, great, epic stories, it's inspiring, there's everything in there. There's really just history, everything that ever happened is history, you know what I mean? History is not just a long list of boring dates and names. History is food, it's sex, it's entertainment, it's music, it's whatever you like is part of history. So that to me is what makes it exciting, that you really have a wide open field right there.
Yeah, well, I think that's what I tell people. I'm like, you guys don't think you like history, but when you go back and you talk about the 1960s Celtics, guess what? That's sports history. That's,
exactly.
When you talk about, if you like old classic cars and you're talking about a 39 business coupe, Plymouth business coupe, I'm like, you like history. That's the history of the automobiles. I'm like, so I think a lot of times people just think history, they think military, they think wars, they think, countries, and they don't look at the fact that, a lot of people like history, just different types of history, and that's all history. And so, yeah, I think that a lot of times people don't realize that they already do like history, just...
Yeah, it's just that it's taught very poorly in school. The way it's done in school, it's boring, it's dry, and nobody cares. But the Dan Carlin is proof that you can do it in a way that's exciting, that people will love, and that it's... I think in that sense, podcasting is miles ahead of where college is in terms of making history actually interesting. Most people are put to sleep by the way history is taught in college. There are exceptions to that. There you're going to find some cool people who teach it well and stuff. But for the most part, not so much.
Yeah. One of the professors that really got my attention was after I graduated high school, I ran into Michael Sandel. He was a professor at Harvard for philosophy, and he put a whole course online on YouTube. And it was perfect because I never went to college, and I'm like, and I love philosophy, but reading it can be boring, and you know what? I get to watch this guy. And the most interesting thing to me was the fact that it was a completely different type of teaching that I ever was exposed to in high school and middle school and grade school, was the fact that he would open up with questions and get the class to debate with each other, open up with a scenario, and have these, the typical historical, these philosophy questions, and people be like, well, why do you think this? Well, okay, now who disagrees with him and why? And it's like, holy shit, this is fun. I'm learning, but I'm interacting and we're debating and I'm like, wow, I'm like, is this what college is like? I think when you interact with people and you realize that it's not so much just the information, but it's how you're exposing people to that information. And like you said, do you have that personality? Do you have the type of because I think you've said before that there's plenty of professors that love the information but don't love interacting and teaching it, and
absolutely.
And I think that becomes a problem. Well, before I take up too much of your time, I also want to talk to you about your book, The Fear of Cage Fighting with a Baby. I'm kidding.
Right.
But it's called Not Afraid, The Fear, Unfair, Heartbreak, Raising a Baby and Cage Fighting. And it's so for people who aren't familiar with it, you've written some books on religion, you've written and that's been a topic that people have gone to you a lot about. But what is this book about? This book seems very much more personal. You've been through some serious life struggles, and which I think a lot of people have probably gone through, and I think we'll probably find it'd be nice to hear somebody talk about it. I think that sometimes talking about these things are some of the hardest things to do, is be able to just kind of talk about a really tragic event in your life without reliving it every time you talk about it, so which
sure.
prevents you from wanting to talk about it, and I know because my mother-in-law just passed away recently, so my wife's been going through a very similar thing with losing her mom at in her 50s. So but from the outside looking in, if somebody who's not familiar with your book, this title obviously hits on a lot of different things. What is the book about?
The one theme is connected to fear, clearly, as the title indicates, but the whole thing is, it is personal. It's sort of, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can
hear you. Can you hear me okay?
I think it broke up for like a second, but it seems all right.
And the whole book is about fear. It's divided in 3 sections. There's a part that's about my experience in martial arts, which may seem unrelated to the second and third part, which is more about life, but in some way to me is very connected, because it's like the kind of stuff that to me, the real important stuff about martial arts is not about technique, it's not about anything else, it's about dealing with difficulties, about dealing with somebody who's trying to punch your head off, it's about learning how to lose when things are not going well. How do you stay in the fight anyway, when you have no realistic hope of winning it? All of that stuff serves quite a bit in terms of then dealing with part 2, which is all about my wife and her death due to brain tumor, and then part 3, which is kind of life afterwards, where that leaves me raising my daughter, who was only a year and a half at the time when this happened, and in some way ultimately coming to the realization that no matter how safe you play it, you're never really safe. That stuff can be taken away from you any moment anyway. And so once you stare at that ugly truth in the face, how does that change your willingness or unwillingness to take chances, your willingness or unwillingness to try new things? There's some of it is horrible because it's a really bad existential realization, and some of it is very freeing because you realize that playing it safe is really not that safe anyway, so you might as well just be who you want to be. And that's, in a nutshell, that's what the way the book plays out.
Yeah, and I mean, you did I think you did a whole podcast on losing your wife, which was just pretty crazy, to be able to talk about it. But I think there's something, it's, for example, like I grew up and I had issues with depression, and one thing that's amazing is that certain topics, certain life experiences, people don't they don't openly talk about. And then when you do talk about it, and then they start sharing their personal story, it seems like they find this relief in, like, okay, well, this person's been through something similar to me, so it gives them comfort into some sense. And
Sure.
I've seen it where, I'll talk to a buddy about dealing with depression growing up, and then all of a sudden they'll talk about their depression issues or experiences, and I'm like, oh shit, I didn't know you dealt with that. And and it's just because they find that comfort in, well, if he's opening up, then I can open up. And so I think there's a lot to that. I think that's why podcasting has become popular. I think people like the uncensored intimacy of getting to know Daniele as Daniele, and not this typical, if you were on CNN talking about your new book, and it's just like typical questions, which means you're going to give and you're limited with time, so you have to give these quick answers, and nobody gets to know you as you. Where with podcasting and writing these books, I think you get a inside look into who this person really is, and it makes you that much more likable, because it's like, oh shit, I know who this person is, and I really like him. He seems like somebody I'd want to hang out with and chill with and have a drink with. So I think that's one of the reasons why podcasting has become so popular. And did you find it hard to talk about things like that, or did it come naturally for you to be able to? Have you always been the type of person that didn't have a hard time talking about the personal life, or talking about very intimate experiences in life, or was it a little bit of a struggle?
No, I have no problem being personal. That doesn't bother me at all. This book in particular was a little rough, because of course it forces me to think about a whole series of heavy, less than pleasant moments in my life. So, I can talk about it, but still just the act of putting my attention there obviously brings me back there to some degree. And in some ways therapeutic and is good, in some ways tough. But no, in general, that stuff never, there are a lot of things that may scare me. Opening up never did. Just laying down, hey, this is where I'm at, this is who I am, that never really bothered me. And I know, that's something that scares a lot of people. So it's funny how bravery and fear are relative things, because, I can be super scared of something that somebody else is going to have no problem with, and vice versa. I can be quote unquote brave, which is really not brave, because brave is if you're scared and you do it anyway. In this case, if it doesn't scare me, it's not really brave. It's just I don't have that fear for whatever reason. So it's kind of a funny thing how that plays out.
And it's funny because I'm much more comfortable around people like yourself who talk about how they feel compared to, you ever meet those chameleons that no matter what people are talking about, they just try to fit in and just say whatever everybody else is agreeing with? Those type of people I always try to stay away from, because I'm like, I don't really know who that person is.
Right.
I don't.
Sure.
They're not letting me know what they really think, what they truly believe. I remember I had a buddy that we would talk about. He'd be hanging out while we would talk about religion, and I'd be with other friends that are kind of atheists, and we'd talk about being atheists. And then one day and he'd always was really polite and like, yeah. And then one day I found out that he came from really Christian family, and I never knew he was a Christian. And I'm like, well, why didn't you just tell us? And it just, there's something about those type of people that it's like they don't want to open up, they don't want to. And then it's not that they could be really nice people who are just shy, but also, there's sometimes you don't know who they really are. So there's a lack
Sure.
of being like, well, who is this person really? What do they really think about me? The second I walk away, are they going to be talking shit, or who do they? How do they really think? What are their true opinions? And so, I think there's a comfort in hanging out and talking to people who are very open like that, and are willing to talk about personal experiences and willing to share their stories. And I think people like that.
Yeah, and I think it's a normal fear to be concerned about sort of laying out who you are on a table, because you're afraid to be judged, you're afraid that other people are going to point fingers and be all criticizing you. At the same time, you also realize that who cares in the great scheme of things? It doesn't really matter whether this person likes you or not, and ultimately it's actually a bad thing if they like you for something they are not. It's much better for people to just say, hey, screw this guy, and that way you can both move on, because you know where you're at. If they like you for who you are, great, then it's easy. If they like you for an image they are projecting, then you have to work hard all the time at keeping up, at pretending to be this other person they are not. And that really is not going to satisfy you, it's not going to satisfy them, it's going to suck. So there's really no point. And I understand it's a natural fear, but it's also kind of a silly one, because it really doesn't protect you ultimately, it doesn't really help you.
Do you think some of why it comes easy is because you're you started writing at a young age? Because for myself, it seems like that's the reason. Like I sometimes I wonder, I'm like, why do I open up so easy? Why do I have not a hard time at all talking about how I feel or whatever? And it seemed like, looking back at a young age, I always used to write poetry and then got into writing music. So I was always used to kind of trying to capture how I felt and then putting it down on paper. So I was always reliving those moments, trying to gather my thoughts and try to figure out, how do I really feel? What's hurting me? What's not hurting me? Do you think that was one of the reasons why you open up so easily, is because at a young age you were doing a lot of writing?
Yeah, and I think also I probably got encouraged in terms of, if you, every time you open your mouth, you have parents who smack you or say, shut up, you don't know anything, and so on. Obviously, you're going to be less than thrilled with expressing yourself. You're going to think that there's something wrong with you. If you grow up in an environment in which people listen to what you have to say and you're encouraged to do so and all of that, then it's a whole different game, and so in that regard, I think, one approach actually helps your self-esteem and one approach does not. And so, of course, I think it's a lot easier for some people than others, depending on what your life experience has been and how much support or not you have had early on.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing you said that's really important is being yourself, because it's so true. I learned at a young age that if I meet a girl, then be myself, because if I put on an act, if I act like I have more money than I do, if I act like I'm cooler than I am, I'm gonna have to continue that act forever. Where if I'm myself and they like me for who I am right off the bat, then I know I might have something. There might be something there. Where I think typically, especially with males, you see a lot of it where they automatically, you have those friends that they get around females and they automatically act a little different. They try to be a little funnier than they are. They try to, and I always tell my friends, I'm like, listen, the same reasons we want to hang out with you, because you're funny, you're honest, because you're fun to have a conversation with. I'm like, that's the same reason anybody's going to want to hang out with you, including women. So be yourself and you're much more likely to succeed, especially as I think we get better to kind of see through bullshit. I think girls can kind of see that, when you're bullshitting them a little bit.
Absolutely, and ultimately it's a freeing thing. It's like you feel so much better when you don't have to pretend to be somebody else, when you don't have to. It takes a lot of energy, and it's annoying to ultimately. There's something incredibly freeing about being able to say, hey, this is who I am, you like it, you don't. It's relaxing. You can take a deep breath in that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's a beautiful Saturday. We both got the sun hitting us in the face. I don't want to keep you in front of a computer for too long. And so thank you so much, Daniele. It's always a pleasure having you on. I always have a blast talking to you. I always write down a bunch of notes that I never end up talking to you about, because these casual conversations are just fun, and I don't ever want to ruin them by trying to take us somewhere where the conversation's not going. But in the show description, I'll put links to your new podcast, History on Fire. Please, people, check it out. You meet people who love history, and if you don't have time to read books, then you know what? Podcast is a perfect opportunity to kind of, if you have a hunger for knowledge, to kind of feed that hunger. And I think a lot of people who commute, like myself, I do a lot of driving for work. And if you hate your job, one thing that makes it a little easier is actually just making that drive useful by learning something that's thought provoking and something that's a conversation starter. So do that. Also check out his book. I have not read his new book yet, but I know if it's anything like his other ones, it's well written and fairly easy to read and fun, just fun, and you get to really know him as him. So I'm sure it's delightful. I'll be getting it very soon, so hopefully I'll get that and find some time to read it, and I'll hopefully have you on again in the future. And keep up the great work, Daniele. I know you're a busy guy, and everybody who gets a response to a email, thanks, because we all appreciate it. It's awesome that you can keep doing that, and you're not that far out of reach for your fans.
Cool, man. Thank you so much. And if anybody's interested, I did it also as an audiobook. So if people don't have the time or they don't dig reading as much, but they like listening to stuff, it exists in audiobook format. So, there are options.
It's on Audible?
No, it's not. I actually just put it on my website. Okay. It's only the audiobook version is just at danielebolelli.com for sale.
I actually think that's better because that way you don't have to go through Audible. You can kind of just download it. So you just download it from there, and then you can put it in your phone or put it wherever.
Exactly. You put it. I think it only works if you download it on a computer, but then of course you can take the files and transfer them to your phone or wherever you want.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, because that's the one thing about Audible is that you're kind of stuck with their, using their service. And I know when I tried it a while ago, and it was, I think when it first came out, you had to pay monthly, and so I mean, this type of services seems much better because you just pay for that one book you want, and there's no monthly fee. So awesome. Well, thank you again, Daniele. Enjoy your Saturday, and I'll have you on again. And I know there's some UFC fights tonight, so I'm sure you'll be watching that similar to myself. So we'll have you on again, and maybe next time we'll talk about McGregor and what's going on in the UFC.
Perfect. Will do. Have a good one, man.
Hey, you
Thanks
too.
so much.
Thank you. Yep. Thank you.
Bye.
Believe in the ripple effect.